And you all are familiar with the loss and damage agenda. Globally now, what we are having is increasing frequency and magnitude of climate impacts. So loss and damage curve is on the increase globally. We are living in a kind of new normal of extreme events, but still we don't have any dedicated funding for loss and damage. On the other hand, we also need to build capacity to address climate change issues, including loss and damage in the LDC countries. So last year, at the beginning, not last year, even year before, at the beginning of 2019, we could mobilize little funding from the Open Society Foundation for commissioning a study on loss and damage to see how loss and damage as an issue these LDC countries are suffering from, and to prepare case studies. What is the dynamics current and what can be the future in your countries, and what are your expectations from COP26. Then, you know, because of COVID, COP26 has been postponed for a year. We were supposed to finish the project by end of 2020 with attending COP26, but now we have to wait for almost a year to finish our project with no extension. So with this little brief on our topic and on the background, so let me brief a little about the program. First, we'll have the statement. We'll listen to the statement of the Honorable Chair. Then I will invite our distinguished faculty members for presenting their case studies, and then I will introduce each of you. And then we'll have question and answer session. And at the end, Dr. Saleemul, our director, will have the closing remarks. And after all the presentations, we will have the question and answer session. And Fahad, our colleague, and actually the anchor of this project, you all know him well, he will help us in our question and answer session. So, while we continue our session, I request all the participants, while you don't talk, please keep your microphone muted. So, with this little briefing, let us have the honor to invite Mr. Phento Tshering, who is the director of the National Commission, Environment Commission of Bhutan, and also the lead negotiator of the LDC group under the UNFCCC process. We believe that Madam Tenjin Wangmo also is attending today. So over to you, Honorable Chair of the session.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Mizan. Good evening to distinguished participants, organizers, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for organizing this important event and allowing me to share some views. Sorry. As we all know that the issue of loss and damage has been one of the highest priority for the least developed countries for many years, and it will remain top priority until we achieve our targets. We, the LDC, have successfully fought in bringing the issue forward in the context of climate negotiations, which has resulted in the establishment of Warsaw International Mechanism during COP19 in Warsaw, Poland. At the last COP, LDCs once again succeeded together with a group of 77 and China in securing strong outcomes, including on finance and technical support for loss and damage through the Santiago Network for Loss and Damage. We warmly welcome the initiative of the least developed countries University Consortium on Climate Change, LUCCCC, and all the partners institutions that have contributed to these case studies. I would like to extend our gratitude to the International Center on Climate Change and Development, ICCCAD, in Bangladesh, and the Makerere University Center for Climate Change Research and Innovations in Uganda for their leadership in developing this initiative. I'm sure today's case studies presented by the authors will definitely enhance knowledge and understanding of risk management approaches to address loss and damage associated with the adverse effect of climate change. These case studies will definitely bring in coordination and synergies among LDCs, which is timely and needed for the ongoing UNFCCC policy debates, particularly enhancing action and support in the area of finance, technology, capacity building to address respective countries' loss and damage actions, and also to support effective implementation of national policies so as to cope up with recurring negative impact of climate change. We all know that the LDCs are highly vulnerable to the risks of loss and damage, and we also know that we have not contributed significantly to the problem of climate change. Everyone should know that the LDCs are least prepared in combating loss and damage due to climate change. Therefore, we need collective effort in urging international community to provide meaningful support to put all LDCs in readiness to respond adverse effect of climate change. The case studies are an important steps in understanding areas where immediate and long-term supports are needed for LDCs. And also, we will understand our capacities and capabilities in combating effect of climate change. Let us all hope and continue to urge for the international support to help all LDCs for effective implementation of the safety nets and contingency plans that are beneficial and sustainable. The current pandemic is great challenge for LDCs to have face-to-face meetings as well smooth virtual meetings because of internet connectivity and time zone. Despite challenges, we are regularly conducting virtual meetings for our own benefits and the world at large. Lastly, I would like to thank all of you for putting your time and energies into these works and urge all distinguished participants to participation and make this session fruitful and beneficial to LDCs. Thank you and Tashidile. With this, I would like to hand over the floor to the Professor Dr. Mizan Khan. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Thank you. Your statement will give has given us some direction. So in our session, we will be discussing over the issues that you have raised. Now, without much ado, let me alphabetically invite the case study presentation. First, Dr. Nurul Kadir. Let me introduce him. Dr. Nurul Kadir had been a senior government official. He was additional secretary at the Ministry of Forest and Climate Change, Environment, Forest and Climate Change. He was also a long time. He's also a long time negotiator under the UNFCCC process. Also, he was a member of the Warsaw International Mechanism on Loss and Damage. You all know about this mechanism. With this, Dr. Kadir, the floor is yours to present case study of our country.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Mizan Khan. And first of all, thank you, Phento, Tshering, and Dr. Saleemul and other distinguished guests. And thanks for giving me this floor to share the case study. Well, let me do that first. Let me bring this. Okay, it is here. So, can you see this?
Yes, we can see it. Can you make it full screen,
Okay.
please, Dr. Kadir?
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that. I think, yeah. So, well, ladies and gentlemen, whenever the name Bangladesh came to your mind and came to you, then you will certainly visualize a country which is highly vulnerable to the impact of climate change and the delta. You are right. Bangladesh is, according to the Global Climate Risk Vulnerability Index 17, Bangladesh ranks 6. It's a great delta, GBM delta, Ganges, Brahmaputra, Meghna delta, and has a monsoon type climate. If you see, the 80% of its surface of Bangladesh is a flat plain, and 25% of the total area inundated every year in the monsoon period. And for those reasons and others, Bangladesh experienced huge loss and damage due to climate change and frequent climate-induced disasters like cyclone, flood, drought, sea level rise, river bank erosion, biodiversity loss, etc., etc. In the last 100 years, almost 508 cyclones hit Bay of Bengal. 17% of them had severe impacts. Around 22 major cyclones events have been reported since 1970s. Not only that, as the chair said previously, only recently in last May 2020, Bangladesh and India suffered huge loss and damage from the impacts of the super cyclone Amphan. Not only cyclones, the sea level rise due to climate change is a very much concern for Bangladesh. A SAC study indicated that the rate of SLR along the coast of Bangladesh much higher than the global rate. SLR alone has been the leading factor in increasing the soil salinity from 1.5 million hectares under mild salinity in 1973 to compared to 3 million hectares in 2007 in Bangladesh. Due to increasing salinity, 6.8 million people by 2025 and 12.7 million by 2050. Maybe if you consider climate change issues, most of the marks are seen in the coastal zones of Bangladesh. Coastal zones mean southern parts of Bangladesh, but the other parts are not spared. The northern Bangladesh suffers from increasing drought cases due to temperature rise, and that hampers food security. Not only that, due to climate change and climate-induced hazard, displacement has become a serious issue for Bangladesh. We are talking on these issues quite a time, and it is high time for us to take real steps to address this one. It is predicted that every 45 people, one will be displaced worldwide to climate change. And in case of Bangladesh, if you consider this one, it is 7 out of every 45 people. This is certainly a huge concern for all of us in Bangladesh. Loss of profession, loss of areas with high emotional attachment due to displacement have emerged as newer challenge. So you have seen this older challenge as well as the newer challenge. Altogether, Bangladesh suffers a lot. There are economic and non-economic losses that we have experienced previously and currently. Significant portion of the GDP of Bangladesh is dependent on climate-sensitive sectors like agriculture and others. During 1991 cyclone, in coastal regions, Bangladesh had to bear economic loss of about 60 billion Bangladeshi taka, which is equivalent to 761 million. Between 1993 to 2012, Bangladesh experienced a loss of 1.83 billion US dollar, which means 1.16% of GDP due to 22 climate-induced disasters. I'm saying this just to make you understand how dreadful it is for us. Cyclone Sidat in 2007 destroyed 8,817 schools, which affected 103,664 children, and the reconstruction cost was 82 million. Here you see two things. One is the loss of this schools, destruction of the schools that need economic cost of about 82 million. On the other hand, students drop out from their schools. That has a huge long-term impact on us. ILA in 2009 resulted in zero rice production, Satkira, loss in production of US 1.9 million. It might sound that it's not that big, 1.9 million, but you know, rice is our livelihood, life and livelihood. It's culture. So loss in rice, meaning loss in livelihood, loss in our life and our culture. It has importance to our people. Most of the non-economic loss and damage remained unaccounted. That is one of the major problems. Between 1998 and 2000, 60% of the cyclones induced deaths worldwide took place in Bangladesh. If this can be valued in real economic terms, the cost would have been huge. Bangladesh experienced 244 drought. I have talked about this one. Now let's come to the drought issue. Experienced 244 droughts in total in the past years, which affected 47% of the land and 53% of the population. Moreover, drought has forced more than 5 million people in Borin tract. Borin tract means northern part, which is a sort of elevated lands, Borin tract, red soil, at risk of consuming arsenic contaminated groundwater, leads to health issue. And you know about the arsenic contamination in Bangladesh. So it really leads to a health issue, and that costs much. During 1982, 52,896 metric tons price was lost due to drought, which accounted for about 1% of the total damage caused by all types of environmental hazards in Bangladesh. Food provision value for wetland ecosystem services. At the western coast of Bangladesh was BDT, Bangladeshi taka, about 9,250 million. Other wetland ecosystem service includes raw materials, reconstruction, tourism, and art, and their values are BDT 856 million, BDT 120 million, and BDT 0.62 million, respectively. So you also understand the value of our biodiversity and ecosystem services that we lose due to climate change. Asian Development Banks reported that the economic expense due to climate stressors would be 2% of the GDP per year by 2050, which might rise to 9.4% by 21,000. This is really worrisome picture. If we can't take any actions immediately on these issues, then we have to face these disasters in the coming days, now and coming days. Well, you know, Bangladesh, there are a number of policy strategies that exist in address climate change. It is, we have the Bangladesh Climate Change Strategy Action Plans, National Adaptation Program of Action, then your roadmap to NAP, then many of them. But none of the policies explicitly speaks on LND to avert, minimize, and address the negative impact of climate change. Only a few of the policies has element on LND. This may be due to lack of conceptual clarity on loss and damage, or the issue is a little bit newer to us. And those policies that has developed, that has done previously.
Dr. Kadir, you have 1 minute.
No problem. I'm going this one. Just I have 2 more slides.
Yeah. Quick.
Policies lack in addressing climate-induced displacement issues. BCCACP and Disaster Management Act highlighted some. Loss and damage is still addressed under adaptation and barely have any separate sector assigned in Bangladesh. Limited financing in climate change and no financing, more or less no financing, international financing for reducing loss and damage is a huge concern for all of us. Climate-related policies. There are some recommendations that I would like to make. One is climate-related policy must include loss and damage issues. And such policy needs good mix of top-down and bottom-up approach in Bangladesh and other LDCs. This is very important. Climate change policies need to address climate-induced displacement issue. As I said previously, this issue has both economic and non-economic costs. Conceptual clarity on loss and damage is necessary. And for this, further research work is required. Difference of opinion among knowledge leaders had to be minimized. Government, civil society, NGOs, and all stakeholders must act now to lessen the negative impact of climate change through coordinated efforts, with key focusing centering on loss and damage issues. It is necessary to develop a pool of new generation knowledge-based human resource right now. And ultimately, if I combine all those together, I will suggest that a national mechanism that we foresee previously, that has to be established immediately and operationalized sooner. That is the recommendations for at the country level. And I have some ideas for the COP26 that is that are there in the slide. One is the compilation of the unfinished work of COP25 on LND. You know, the issue of governance of the WHIM, and more critically, the finance for loss and damage due to climate change remained unresolved. So urgent provision for global climate finance for LND, specifically for LND, is required and should be the key focus of the LDC most vulnerable countries. We should reiterate calls on international entities, including financial institutions, to continue supporting the development and implementation of measures to avert, minimize, and address the adverse impacts of climate change. You know, this is basically a call for Chile Madrid time for action. It was there. And also request COP26 presidency to make LND issue a permanent agenda item in climate negotiation and offer more financial support to developing nations. It has relations with the previous one. That's basically my recommendation. And one recommendation for the LDC group, LDC chair, is we may organize seminar workshop on current path and future direction on furthering L&D work at global and local level. That could be organized by LDC groups along with other CVF countries and with support like ICCCAD and other like-minded organizations. That's all about from my side. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kadir, for projecting the loss and damage issue of Bangladesh, which is an extremely battered country from climate disasters, and showing us way forward and expectations from COP26. So I hope other colleagues also will follow the same kind of presentation style. First about the your country case studies, way forward, and expectations from COP. So now let us hear the case study of Bhutan, which has been prepared by two faculty members from the Royal University of Bhutan, Dr. Katel, who is the Dean of Research and Industrial Linkages at the College of Natural Resources, Royal University of Bhutan, and his colleague, Ugen. Sorry if I mispronounce your name, but I think it's Ugen. Okay. So, Dr. Om, welcome, you or Ugen.
Okay, maybe I will try. If it doesn't work, then maybe Madam will try.
Yeah.
Okay, so Professor, am I audible?
Yes, go ahead. Can you make it full screen, Om? Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Professor Mizan, for the very kind and nice introduction. And sorry, myself and Madam Bugen is here to present our case studies. And this is our very beautiful campus from where we are delivering this talk. And at the side, you can see that small dot Bhutan, just to say that this is a, those of you who do not know where Bhutan is a landlocked country. Oops, sorry. Something happened. Okay. Yeah. Just to start with, I would like to join Dr. Kadir to say that he has started saying that Bangladesh is a vulnerable country, and then I'd like to join him. And then a couple of years ago, I think I don't remember exactly, but I think 7 years ago, one professor from Bangladesh, he came to Bhutan and he was delivering a talk on climate change. And he was saying, if Bhutan is not careful in the next 10 years, probably Bhutanese people need to migrate to Bangladesh because their soil will migrate to Bangladesh. That is what he was saying, and we didn't understand very clearly. And today we see that if you just look at this picture, the different temperatures, unlike Bangladesh, it depends where you are in the Bhutan. There is a different temperature, like southern part, the red one is really hotter. As you climb towards the north, it becomes cooler. And then we looked at when I heard a professor from Bangladesh saying this a couple of years ago, then we started thinking about what is happening with the climate change situation in Bhutan. So we did this small research, and we used this GCM, some data, and then our country data, and we looked at it. And in the last 100 years, there is a clear increase of temperature by 0.8 degrees Celsius. Of course, when we looked at in the last recent 1 or 2 decades, it was more increase, actually 2 degrees Celsius, actually more than 2 degrees Celsius in the recent decades. And then another interesting thing, what we did was, we looked at the Bhutanese landscape, and then Bhutanese landscapes it's quite complex, actually, because with change in little bit of like 1 degree, 1.5 degrees, not 1 degree actually, sorry, less than 1 degrees, change in temperature actually will have significant impact on the ecosystems and the livelihoods in Bhutan, because there are microclimatic conditions, which is actually when settlements are located at different elevations, they are impacted very differently. And then when we talk about adaptations, then it turns out that they need to actually embrace different types of adaptation, different level of adaptations, and then they also suffer. They face different, loss and damage, different level of loss and damage. And then basically to show that, the last one, as you move from southern part of Bhutan to the northern part of Bhutan, the precipitation also changes quite significantly. And then we looked at this, simulated changes in climate variables from some of the published literature, and also we looked at our own gray literature, and then we see that the mean annual temperature, mean summer temperature, mean winter temperature, all of these are actually increasing by more than 2 degrees Celsius within this time period of 2040 to 2069 or to 2070, actually. So if we just look at mean annual precipitation, it shows that there would be increased by 20% precipitation, but then there would be wetter monsoon and then drier winter. When there is water, there would be too much of water. When there is no water, then it's actually completely dry. So, and that's quite risky comparing, relating to the landscape of Bhutan, land architecture of Bhutan. And then we just look at similarly winter mean total precipitation that is decreasing by about 5 millimeter per season from 1982 to 82. That's 2069. Sorry, there is a typo. So this map, if you just look at these are the red dots are the rice fields in Bhutan. When I talk about rice fields, the total arable land in Bhutan is less than 3% of its country land area. So when I say rice fields is actually less than 50% of that total arable land. So you can imagine how much land is there for rice cultivation in Bhutan. Of course, rice is also a staple for food for Bhutan, for Bhutanese. So when these rice fields are located along the river basins, and then most of these rivers actually, if you just look at another slide, these rivers are actually fed by glaciers. And the data shows that these glaciers are retreating. There are lakes in the higher altitude areas. These are actually, coming up, and then some of them, they are, at the verge of, bursting. And then if you just look at this dark red dots, these are settlements. And then we can imagine the risks of floods, outburst floods, number one. And when there is no water, we can also imagine what would be the implications to these rice fields and then settlements in Bhutan. And this is from one published literature. And then if you just look at the snow glaciers from 1996 to 2017, there is a clear change in the glaciers. And then if you just look at the rock bare land, there is also distinct, change in the areas, which means the rock bare ground increased, and then the snow glaciers has decreased. And then how that is actually so true that this rock bare land appearing is just because of the snow glaciers, because in the low altitude areas they did not appear, but in the high altitude areas in the snow-clad mountains that appeared. And then if you just look at this, this is a Bhutan map, and there are these white circles. In the southern part of Bhutan, these circles are relatively bigger. But if you just go towards the north, then this becomes smaller, which means these bubbles are based on the water balance, since southern Bhutan receives quite a lot of precipitation. And water balance is the water that is what is left after precipitation and evaporation. And then as central and northern Bhutan receives less water, then the water what is left in the country is less. And also, interestingly, if you just look at, there are red dots, and these red dots mean these are negative water balance. So it's already negative water balance. And if you just look at this, it's not very clear, but most of the settlements and then rice fields are actually located along this region. And we can already actually start thinking about now what will happen in the next decades or so when the temperature is changing, and when it is changing in an unprecedented way. Now, we just looked into this different extreme weather events, and then we just tried to look at from the perspective of economic loss and damage. And there are these the different events from 1994, 1996, that was the earliest we could trace, and then 2013, and then in this one, I'll show you the next slide as well. But in this one, if you just look at the first one is the glacier lake outbursts, flash floods, and then rice blast epidemics, and high intensity monsoon. The nationwide is affected.
You have 1 minute.
Okay. So similarly, from 1994 to 2000, so there are these the weather events. And then if you just look at, there is loss in crop and loss in land and loss in property because of these extreme weather events. And if you just look at non-economic loss, these stresses are similar, like heavy rain, bursting of slides and debris, etc. But these are, of course, yet to be accounted. I mean, I think it's difficult to put a just price tag directly, but these are significant losses that is recorded since the 1994. And if you just at the country level, just to conclude that, of course, the government has put a lot of effort in mainstreaming the climate change issues and incorporating into the 5-year plans, and then injecting funds from the national and then different the funding agencies they have obtained. But definitely government need to look at food and nutrition security is a serious issue, and then probably in the next decade or so, if the proper or appropriate measures is not taken into account, then the food and nutrition security would be at the I don't know how to say that, but it's a very serious. And then securing national freshwater systems, since we have a lot of water, but the economic use of water is very less. And then the springs water are drying, the water balance in the areas where it is required is less. So need to think about how to secure the freshwater there. And similarly, our hydropower, that is the main source of the economic revenue, are faced by this glacier water. So the alternative technologies need to be thought out, and then need to do some research. And then when we are looking at this non-economic loss, basically mobility, cultural heritage, indigenous knowledge, biodiversity, ecosystem services, sense of place and social cohesion turns out to be the major issues which is very difficult to take into account. So research, building the capacity of the national research institutions, academic institutions, and then building the research database is pertinent. And finally, loss and damage is a debate that can actually unpack various issues, and then it can actually provide the factual data on how much and where we can actually invest to address the loss and issues regarding the climate change. And then Bhutan is a mountainous ecosystem. It's a fragile, and it has so many issues, as I talked. Since it's a main resource, revenue resource is the water, and then water is also related to the livelihoods. So there are actually not really the issues related to the livelihood only, but also the national economy, which is actually a big issue. And recognizing the loss and damage, the concept of loss and damage, and if the countries are to deliver the ambitious and complete and enhanced climate actions, so support is required, and then this support must be given to the countries in order to when the delivery on ambitious actions is expected, and then when countries are required to do this, the strategies and then action plans need to be supported by the relevant agencies. Thank you, Professor. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Om. Dear participants, you got to hear such a contrast. Bangladesh as a floodplain country with very low elevation, and just across our border, we have Bhutan with high mountains and very high elevation. So their impacts are a little different than ours, but the loss and damage is the same across all our countries. So with this, let us go to West Africa, to Gambia, and let me invite Dr. Sidat Yaffa, who is a professor and dean of the School of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences, University of the Gambia. So welcome, Dr. Sidat. The floor is yours.
Okay. Can you let me share mine?
Yeah, you upload, please. And I will request all the presenters to stick to maximum 8 minutes. Just summarize your presentation, way forward, and your expectations from COP, upcoming COP. So,
is everyone seeing it?
Yes, sure.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, my colleagues. I miss all of my fellow negotiators. My name is Professor Sidat Yaffa, University of the Gambia, and I'm the director of the University of the Gambia LUCC program. And I developed this together with my colleague, Ms. Fatimata Ediba, who is the deputy UTG LUCC director. Currently, she's busy on her master's thesis defense. I don't know if she will be able to join. And also, we had comments from Ms. Habiba Tudrame, who is the UTG LUCC student coordinator, and the UTG Mr. Ibrahim SF Ba, UTG student president. I'm happy to make this presentation. Country context, loss and damage as a result of drought. For example, in the Gambia, negatively impacts people's coping and adaptive abilities. And also L&D caused Gambian farmers they are not yet able to cope with or adapt to the impacts of climate change, which results to loss and damage. A case study on loss and damage was conducted in 2013 in the Gambia, and that study report showed that 70% of the survey respondents indicated that they have been severely impacted by the drought that occurred in 2011. As a result of drought in the Gambia in the past 20 years, most drought-affected households employ coping measures not able to put forward food on the table for their families. They just try to cope. So in some instances, as of now, some families received food aid and planting seeds from local and international NGOs, like Phento in Enhance the Gambia and ActionAid International the Gambia. In some cases, these NGOs help the local communities build cereal banks, which serve as buffers against hunger during periods of drought. Climate change impacts on vulnerabilities. Decreasing rainfall in the Gambia has led to severe droughts during the last decades of the 20th century. For example, rainfall from 1970 to 1980 and 1990s were much drier compared to the period between 1922 and 1996, which seems mostly due to a reduction in rainfall events during the monsoon period. Also, the length of the rainy season seems to be increasingly variable. Sometimes, some years we have up to 1,000 millimeters per rainy season, sometimes 800 millimeters per rainy season, sometimes even less than 800 millimeters of rain per rainy season in the Gambia. So the long-term trend in the Gambia is towards more drought and greater rainfall variability. Because of these prevailing drought conditions, Gambians will be particularly vulnerable to the consequences of such climate changes because of their high level of poverty. If you look at this map here, it shows from 1886, rainfall patterns in the Gambia in the last 100 years, from 1886 up to 2002. You can see variable. If you look at from 1996 all the way to the end here, from 1996, you can see decreasing all the way to 2002 and even beyond. So that shows that drought is a serious problem in the Gambia. What are the existing policies, institutional frameworks, and gaps? The existing policies. Currently, the Gambia has enacted, the National Assembly has enacted a national climate change policy that defines the following long-term vision for the Gambia, meaning to achieve a climate resilient society through systems and strategies that mainstream climate change, disaster risk reduction, gender and environmental management for sustainable social, political, and economic development. So this national policy, national climate change policy, has this long-term vision for the Gambia. And the institutional frameworks. The Gambia's response to climate change is guided by 11 principles, which are consistent with the existing national policy framework, which is aligned to the UNFCCC and have been informed by relevant international best practices. So all this information are available in the National Climate Change Policy, and the National Climate Change Policy is available online. And what are the gaps? One, minimum coordination between government institutions in terms of implementation. Two, mainstreaming climate change actions in the national development process by 2025 is quite a long time to address climate change impacts like loss and damage, because loss and damage is currently here. So if we want to start implementation of this mainstreaming climate change actions by 2025, to me, that's a long time and that's a big gap. And finally, on the gap, hardly any government funding. Yes, we have a national climate change policy, but the funding is very, very limited, and National Climate Committee is not yet functional. Yeah, under the policy, we have a National Climate Committee, but that committee is yet to start operations. So that's a major gap. What are the economic and non-economic losses of loss and damage in the Gambia? Economic losses, for example, death of farmers' livestock, low crop production, reduced farmer incomes, and raising food prices. During the times of drought, we have seen, especially in the North Bank region of the Gambia, where some of the farmers have lost their livestock because they were dead. They couldn't have forage, they couldn't have enough water. And the low production, food production also was a major problem in economic loss, because farmers depend on these crops when they sell them to make income. So the farmers' incomes have reduced, and that resulted to rising food prices, which was a major economic loss for the farmers. According to Jallo 1995 and Njai in 2016, a 27% fall below normal rainfall. Normal rainfall ranges in the Gambia from 800 millimeters to 1,000 millimeters per rainy season in any given year would generate a 43% decline in granule production, 10% decline in coarse grains, and 28% decline in production for all other crops. So this is a serious, major economic losses for Gambian farmers directly and the whole country at large. And the non-economic losses means negative impacts of climate change that are difficult to measure or quantify in monetary terms. Those are what we term as non-economic losses, impacts that we cannot quantify in monetary terms. It goes unaccounted for by the scientific community. Even at the UNFCCC, there was a debate on how do we define non-economic losses. And the political leadership around the world, generating and in the Gambia in specific, there's still a struggle on how to have a real definition of non-economic losses. And for example, drying up of local hand-dug wells in women gardens, which I will show the next slide in picture, and also sea level rise, that is washing away of a Gambian historical site and graveyards that the communities that surround that historical site losing income. The picture on the left is the historical site. This is called James Island. It's a major tourist attractive area, but unfortunately, because of the sea level rise, the place is washing away. So if nothing is done in the immediate terms, so it means the communities around this area, around this James Island, will lose a lot of their livelihood. And the picture on the right is the women garden. You see the hand-dug well, where the women are fetching water to irrigate their vegetable crops. It becomes a challenge because the wells are drying as a result of low precipitation in the country. Conclusions, Mr. Chair. Loss and damage caused by climate change in the Gambia negatively impacts people's coping and adaptive abilities. And it causes both economic losses, that's in monetary terms, and non-economic losses, that is non-monetary terms. Gambian farmers have not yet been able to cope with or adapt to the impacts of climate change, which result to loss and damage. Erratic and insufficient rainfall has been the norm in the Gambia in the past decades, where I showed on the graph. A national climate change policy is in existence to cater for loss and damage. Yes, that's a good step by the government to have a national climate change policy as a start in order to address loss and damage. Although loss and damage is not explicitly mentioned in this national climate change policy, but it addresses issues that lead to loss of income, loss of food production, et cetera, which are directly related to loss and damage. There are institutional frameworks in place, but not national funding mechanism is set to place. If you read the national climate change policy, it talks about setting up a national climate change fund, but nothing has been put in that fund yet. And finally, under the conclusion, there is poor coordination among government institutions in terms of implementation of climate change action plans. Yes, we have the national climate change policy, but when it comes to implementation, we're struggling, meaning the country is struggling from the government part in getting all the government institutions to have a one voice in order to address this implementation issue. Recommendations for next steps at country level. 1, fully fund the national climate change policy programs and activities through the National Climate Change Fund. 2, initiate effective coordination mechanisms among government and non-government institutions in terms of implementation of climate change programs and plans. 3, increase sensitization about loss and damage and how to effectively adapt to the impact of loss and damage, because loss and damage is a new area in terms of research, it's a new area in terms of implementation in the Gambia, so there has to be an increase in sensitization or awareness creation within the country so that people can really understand what loss and damage is and how it impacts their lives and livelihood. And 4, initiate loss and damage insurance scheme to protect vulnerable communities by increasing their resilience. There has to be a loss and damage insurance scheme as a start in order to protect our poor, vulnerable communities by increasing their resilience. Recommendations for COP26, I have 3. 1, provide adequate and sustainable funding for Warsaw International Mechanism on Loss and Damage. Yes, as a former negotiator, climate change negotiator, I know we've been talking about WIM, but when it comes to implementation, when it comes to providing technology and development and transfer, there's hardly any done on it. Now we have to push very hard so that the WIM becomes an independent entity within the UNFCCC, and also it has funding. The fund research or case studies in LDCs, on all the LDCs, we have to continue doing, carrying out case studies of research on the impact on loss and damage, on the impacts of especially non-economic losses as a result of loss and damage. And finally, Mr. Chair, UNFCCC Adaptation Committee and the WIM should work very closely in the interest of the LDCs. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Yaffa. Yes, you have raised a few questions which are of deep interest for us and also extremely complex, like valuation of non-economic losses and damage, and also insurance as relates to loss and damage, which is a little controversial because we need to have something more than insurance, and I'm sure we will have questions on this. Anyway, so next, Hanna Habtemariam from Ethiopia. Sorry, I skipped the alphabetical order. It was absolutely inadvertent. So, Hanna, the floor is yours to present the Ethiopian case studies. Hello, Hanna. You here? I don't find Hanna. So please remove, Dr. Yaffa, your presentation. Fahad. Okay.
Let me close it.
Hanna, please come in. Sorry
Yes.
for inadvertent skipping of the alphabetical order, but please come in with your presentation for 8 minutes.
Thank you so much, Professor Mizan.
You upload your presentation so that we can see.
How can I do that? Sorry.
Fahad, if you have your presentation, Ethiopia,
Yeah.
then Fahad, you
Okay, I
please
will be sharing your presentation from my end.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. And try to keep the time, 8 minutes, because we have lots to go ahead.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we can see.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to present Ethiopian case study. Dr. Iyasu and myself did the case study. Our case study has the following outlines. We did country context with the most recent disasters and their impacts. And then we have assessed the climate change impacts and the vulnerability and what caused the vulnerability. And then we saw the policy, existing policy, how they are institutionalized and how they are implemented. And then we see the economic loss and damage from the many occurring climate-induced disasters. We found out that flood and drought are the main disasters. So we have seen the economic loss and damage of both. In the case of non-economic loss and damage, there's almost none literature. So we extrapolate data from the economic loss and damage, and then we have assessed the ongoing project on loss and damage, and we were unable to find any project directly impacted on the loss and damage. Therefore, we have included some projects that are indirectly has impact on loss and damage. And finally, we saw the gaps in policy framework and their implementation. So this is the contents of our case study. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So I will directly go to my presentation. Ethiopia, we have more than 140 million population. We are the second in Africa next to Nigeria. When we see the topography, we have diverse topography as low as 126 meters below sea level and as high as high mountains, 4.5 thousand meters. And when we see the vulnerability, our country is extremely vulnerable to the impacts of climate change with low adaptive capacity. Because of our vulnerability, we are highly affected by extreme climate events. And the main reason for our vulnerability is our economy is mainly depend on climate sensitive economy. For example, 34.8% of GDP came from subsistence agriculture, and agriculture also employed more than 72.7 population, and foreign exchange of 90%. And our main energy supply is hydro energy supply, which is highly affected by climate. Moreover, our country is prone to drought and desertification because more than 70% of the area is arid and semi-arid, and because of that, during the rainy season, there is a probability of occurrence of 40% moderate to severe drought. Next slide, please. So to present some of our findings. Let's start from the recent one. Recently, we have been affected by desert locust invasion, which was occurred by 2 cyclones in Arabian desert. Just in February 2020, because of the locust invasion, over 3,000 hectares of cropland were affected, and because of that, we have more than 356 metric ton crop failure. And this is not just one-time event; it is still ongoing. And we believe that at the end of this year, half of the crops that were planted will be damaged because of the desert locust. And as I mentioned previously, one of the major climate-induced disasters that highly affect Ethiopia and cause a huge loss and damage is flood and drought. And this flood and drought damage and cause a great loss annually and yearly because of erratic and low rainfall. Crop production fail, and about 3 million people are affected, and this will add to the 7.6 million people that are already food insecure and supported by safety net program. Next slide, please. So to see some of the economic and non-economic loss and damage of flood, as we can see that flood is frequently occurring event in our country, and as you can see in previous year, it was like every 3 or every 5 year event, and when we see the number of people affected, it's like in thousands, in 2 digits. As you can see, the frequency of the event is like become almost a yearly event, and when we see the number of the area of coverage, it was like restricted to certain parts previously, but nowadays it's almost cover in large areas and affects 190 people per year. To see the recent events in 2019, you can see that the flood affects almost every part of the region, and about 42,200 people were displaced, and we can imagine the economic and non-economic impacts. And to see the most recent one in this year 2020, just in 4 months, February, March, and April, around 470,000 people were affected. And keep in mind that this is before the major rainy season, and these are the people affected and the economic loss because of flood. Next slide, please. So just like flood, because of droughts, we are highly affected, and as we can see in this table, the trend is like increasing trend. Previously, like only few places, for example, Tshering and Wollo region were highly affected because of drought, and million people were affected within 2 or 5 years. But recently, the number is increasing, and the area coverage is almost Ethiopia. To mention some of the recent events of drought, we can see the 2050-60 El Nino-induced drought. It was very prolonged drought, and it affects 10.7 million people just in a year, and there was economic loss of $1.7 billion US, and because of the prolonged drought, almost 50% income was failure of 50% income for the rural poor farmers, and this trend go on, and the number of people affected are like increasing from time to time, and the area coverage is also increasing vastly. Next slide, please. Well, to mention some of the non-economic loss and damage, we only found one study that directly deals with the non-economic loss, and the study points out that social cohesion, which was indicated as the quality of life, and it is the trend of the society helping each other during the drought period, providing food to each other, providing free labor, and providing agricultural input. Because of the severity and the frequency of the drought, it is severely affected. Moreover, the ecosystem services, for example, access to water, because of the severity of the drought, it's also severely affected. And when we see the economic impacts of the drought and flood at country level, because of the severity, budgets that were allocated for health, education, and agriculture were forced to are relocated to relief recovery and rebuilding. For example, just between 2007 and 2010, 60% of the total budget allocated for Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development went to disaster risk relief as well as food security. Moreover, when we see one data in 2011, only droughts, it cost $1.1 billion, which was almost the same amount of money Ethiopia obtained in order to tackle poverty and emergency. And you can see the economic pressure and impacts of these disasters at country level. Next slide, please. Therefore, as recommendation at country level, in order to achieve middle income country by 2025, we're supposed to reduce our vulnerability to climate change impact. So to do that, we have to establish strong and stable institutional arrangement. When we see the current trend, the institutional arrangement is changing time to time, and that causes a huge gap in coordination. Therefore, we have to establish strong and stable institutional arrangement at all levels in order to undertake disaster risk management. Moreover, we have laws, but when we see the implementation really lacks enforcement. Therefore, we have to set a mechanism in order to enforce policy and laws. Furthermore, currently more emphasis was given to emergency aid. So rather than doing that, we have to give attention to risk minimization as well as slow onset events. When we assess the current policies and institutional implementation, we have found that almost half of the country has almost in Warada, half of the country we have done risk assessment, but that risk assessment lacks short, medium, and long-term plans. Therefore, we're supposed to do that in all levels. Moreover, there was a shortage of scientific knowledge on disaster risk management and loss and damage. Therefore, we have to strengthen our scientific, technical, and technological capacity of human as well as system. And then when we assess the existing literature, we have seen that at provisional level, there was economic loss and damage somehow was addressed, but non-economic loss and damage is totally ignored. Therefore, our country should focus both economic and non-economic loss and damage and give more emphasis and do both. Finally, next slide, please. So what we recommend for COP26 is that our country meets small amount of greenhouse gas, but in spite of all warning scenario, we are going to face the impacts of climate change. Therefore, Ethiopia as a country needs international attention and support to acquire budgets to strengthen complex risk management, risk reduction, and preparedness in order to minimize the impacts of loss and damage. Moreover, we couldn't find any project directly entitled on loss and damage. Therefore, we need to have budget to undertake projects that deal with minimizing the impacts of loss and damage. And then finally, strengthen, if there is, otherwise established South to South or South to North collaboration platform on knowledge sharing of risk management and loss and damage. This is my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hanna, for your presentation. You have brought out some important issues which we'll discuss after all the presentations. Now, let us invite the Malawi case study. I hope it will be presented, we think it will be presented by Dr. Kazembe. Full name is Dr. John Abdul Aziz Kazembe, who is a senior lecturer at the Ulonge Agriculture University and Natural Resources University in Malawi. And also the case study was supported also by Dr. Junis, his colleague. So please, Dr. Kazembe.
Okay, I'll be the one presenting. So
Yes.
it's me,
So welcome,
Junis.
Dr. Junis.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm Junis from Malawi, specifically Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources. So we'll be presenting the case study for Malawi. In our presentation, we'll present the context and outputs for Malawi case study, and then recommendations for both country as well as COP26. So, in our country, Malawi, loss and damage has got a very narrow definition compared to the special definition that we have as impacts that cannot be addressed by mitigation and adaptation alone. Here we understand it as just unavoidable consequences or negative effects or residual impacts. Because of this narrow understanding of the definition, the actions to address loss and damage at country level are embedded in adaptation and mitigation programs. There are no specific actions that targets loss and damage. However, much as the country understands loss and damage at that narrow level, the vulnerabilities for our country are quite huge. The country is vulnerable at both individual, household, community levels, but also the sectors of our economy, like agriculture, which is the main sector for contribution to our GDP is affected, the water sector, the fishery sector, energy, infrastructure, health, etc., etc. So though loss and damage is understood at that narrow level, but the impacts of loss and damage have affected almost all the sectors of our country. And at a country level, we noted that the policy and legislations that we have are mostly to do with climate action. So we have dedicated policies for climate, which Environmental Affairs Department is the custodian for those policies and legislation. So we have National Climate Change Management Policy, National Adaptation Framework, etc., etc. But also we have the issue of climate change integrated in other natural resources management related policies. So at policy level, we can say climate change is the one that is featured so much than the issue of loss and damage itself being taken up as explicit. In terms of institutions that tackle climate change related issues, we have Environmental Affairs Department, as I said, as a custodian of all dedicated climate policies, but also other departments which just mainstream the issue of climate change. But when it comes to issues of loss and damage, we have a Department of Disaster Management that is responsible for that. So much as climate change is tackled by Environmental Affairs Department, but there's a shift of looking at loss and damage by another department. So that department takes Environmental Affairs Department as just one of the departments may be affected. So there's that kind of discrepancy in terms of institutional arrangement to look at issues of loss and damage. Okay, in terms of economic losses that the country has faced, the household sector in terms of housing is the one that has suffered so much. So we had data from 2005 to 2019, this side, and you can notice that there has been a tremendous increase in the number of households that have been affected since 2005. So as the years are progressing, more people are experiencing losses and damage due to climate change related events, but also other sectors, other than the households, sectors like the social sector, including the education, health, they have been affected. And the data that we have is for 2015 because we had El Nino events, and also the 2019 because of the cyclone Idai. So from these two sets of data, we can see that really we have encountered a lot of loss and damage, and if estimated in terms of monetary terms, in 2015, the loss and damage was estimated at $335 million, and in 2019, 220. So for us, it's quite a huge amount. In terms of non-economic losses and damage, you can see from the table right here that data is very scanty. Their data is very scanty, and there are like less programs, or there's less coordination and actions towards collecting data so that we can quantify the both economic and non-economic losses and damage. So based on the situation that we have, we noted that at country level, the recommendations amongst many that we can make is to strengthen coordination mechanisms and documentation of loss and damage. Something like putting in place a dedicated section, either within the government, maybe in Environmental Affairs Department or Department of Disaster Management, either of those, but having a dedicated section within those departments that can coordinate issues of loss and damage, because it's like we are concerned about climate change, but we haven't taken much effort in trying to understand the losses and damage that we encounter due to that climate change. So there's scanty data, and then there's like no coordination at all of trying to understand the losses and damage. But also there's need for a clear financial provision and financing modalities, more or less like to devise a dedicated financial mechanism, so that financial mechanism should assist in addressing loss and damage, but also to strengthen capacity on loss and damage in terms of data and information collection, analysis, documenting, and reporting. At COP26, we thought that maybe we can recommend for a consistent financial support, so that we should have a dedicated financial mechanism for loss and damage for least developed countries, more or less like a polluter pay principle, that those countries that are highly polluting, they should be able to pay for that informal as a way of paying for the damages or compensation to climate, but also devising other new innovative sources of financing loss and damage in least developed countries, other than maybe the polluter pay principle, but also at the COP, members can brainstorm on other innovative ways of how we can come up with that dedicated financing for loss and damage, but also to elevate this issue of loss and damage and making it permanent on the agenda for COP meetings. So maybe if we can have this issue debated at length by all members, maybe something can change out of that. So that is the short presentation from Malawi. Thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Zunis, for your presentation and keeping the time more or less. Thank you very much. Now let us invite and let us come back to East Africa again and invite Dr. David Phento Mukija and his colleague Dr. Revocatus for making the case for Uganda. They both are senior lecturers at the University of Makerere in East Africa. So David or Revo, please upload your presentation. Fahad, will you help or?
Sir, David has uploaded his presentation.
Yeah. Okay.
David, can you make it full screen?
Yeah.
David, you have to unmute.
Yeah. David. David, please unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, go ahead. Well done.
Okay.
Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, my screen is my computer. I don't know.
If you have problem, then Fahad can help you.
I'm trying to move the slides a bit. Maybe I stop and let me stop and I share again.
Okay. Maybe what he could do, Chair, in order to save time, if he can send it to Fahad right now.
Yes.
Then we'll have Bangladesh, the last one. Before the last one finishes, Fahad will be able to take care of this for him. If he has problem with his computer, David has problem.
I think, David, you have some problem. Now. So we can go to
he's
next.
sharing now.
It's got a, try it again, David, go ahead. We can see it.
Yeah.
Can you see it now?
Yes, we can see. Try shifting slides. Put it on full screen. Yeah.
Yes.
And move to next slide. No, yeah.
So, sorry, I don't know why it's very slow. I hope you'll be able to hear me. We've been having a very big internet problem nationally. And I'll be, as much as possible, try to be brief. To begin with, in as far as Uganda is concerned, the historical projections and the impact studies show that Uganda really faces a very huge climate risk. And this climate risk is reflected in policies, plans, and impacts. But in the context of policies and evidence on loss and damage, there are quite a number of issues and highlights I would like to make here. First is that in as far as Uganda is concerned, the national climate change policy focuses on adaptation as its priority. And I think this is not surprising, like most least developed countries. And the issue in as far as loss and damage is concerned is that the climate change policy, the NDCs, do not explicitly in tangible ways that mention loss and damage. It's in some few instances where you have mentions of loss separate from damage in a view of climate change. So in that case, you find that it's really not something that is being held within the policy context. Fortunately, the country is now in the final stages of coming up with a climate change bill with a clear definition of loss and damage, and with the direction at that level on how loss and damage, both economic and non-economic losses, are going to be dealt with. But all other climate change policy frameworks and planning frameworks, loss and damage is glaringly missing. It doesn't exist. And I think this is not surprising for sure, because we know how the debates and negotiations around loss and damage have been going. So there hasn't been much more what I would call proactive effort at national level to bring this at the forefront. So it's not surprising that, as we know, it's only in 2015 that we had loss and damage being recognized, minimal, I would say, in the Paris Agreement. So this trend seems to have been the same at national level in Uganda. And to that effect, we were really stunned to find out that there are no studies specifically focused on providing evidence on loss and damage in Uganda to inform policy and action. So in other words, there exists information, but there is lack of intentional focus on investigating this aspect to really provide that direction as far as this is concerned. So, and Uganda as a country, and again, this is broadly from the basis of broader climate context, the major hazards are droughts, storms, and frequent recurrence of floods. These are real issues, the main ones. The top notch, these are the ones, and the number one is droughts. And the floods come number two. And these hazards come in a vulnerability context that has low institutional capacity, socioeconomic constraints, associated with the levels of income and related aspects, and of course, limited countrywide weather monitoring system. I'm mentioning this and emphasizing this because in as far as loss and damage, attribution is very critical. And doing attribution without this kind of information based on very good weather monitoring systems becomes a challenge that we need to mention, I think, because it's going to be a very hard argument at any level to talk about advancing loss and damage with very weak means of arguing for attribution of loss and damage and I think it's going to be used as a very big trap on how far we can advance the arguments and the negotiations around loss and damage. So there is, like I mentioned before, understanding around loss and damage is glaringly missing, and it's a big issue. So some snapshots on the work we've been doing on the case study, and I must mention that even the figures in terms of loss, economic loss and damage, these are heavily, heavily underestimated. They are heavily underestimated. If you look at where they are coming from, you can clearly see that this is far, far below what the quantities can be in terms of the economic loss and damage. So these are just examples that come out, but you read there's an issue. This is on the lower end that you would expect this. Like I said, the key issues, hazards and disasters are around floods and droughts. Just to give an example, you find that in 1 year, in 1997, 1998, we had losses and damage around only infrastructure, road infrastructure, up to $400 million US, just in 1 year. And again, you have an example of drought. You have issues to do with crop failure. You have severe shortages of forage and water for livestock. You have reduction in food production, like others have mentioned. These are the key areas, and these can only be indicators of the figures that you have, and requiring actually thorough understanding of how much actually the real rigorously investigated information around these losses and loss and damage. In terms of non-economic losses and damage, again, the same hazards that I mentioned before. Those are the ones you find that death of people associated with the diseases like cholera outbreaks. We have had, these have been very, very significant in Uganda. Whenever there are floods, you have cholera outbreaks, you have people being displaced, and quite a number of people in some cases have, like in 1997, 98, we had the available information shows about 1,682 people died. Displacement of massive numbers of people and the loss of infrastructure. And so these keep on repeating over and over again. What comes out clear essentially is you need to look at, a thorough understanding again on how these have come out in terms of the quantifications beyond, quick snapshots of the reports that we have seen. So quite informative, they provide information, but we strongly believe that there is really need to really understand this a little bit more, because if you look at the way the work has been done and how much work has been done, these are really on the lower side. So what do we say in terms of recommendations? And we think that these recommendations at country level really should be some of the things they should be packaging among the things that are to advance, even when they go to COP26. The climate change bill has been slower than one would have expected, and that's a very important entry point to really argue and even advance and advocate for aspects and issues around loss and damage. But the country has been really much slower than you would have ever expected. It's in the final stages. It is in the hands of the president to ascend to, but it has been really given the priority that it's much more than it would deserve. And then once this bill, which explicitly integrates loss and damage, is in place, then it should further and very fast be taken to be integrated into policy and planning frameworks in the country. Like I mentioned before, Uganda now has a very strong climate change policy frameworks, and it's really being translated now into practice at local levels. But then once this is done, it should be a much more drive into pushing the loss and damage into much more tangible and legally guided loss and damage policy and practice. And again, we saw in what I've mentioned before, evidence on loss and damage is really a big issue. And I think this requires urgent attention, not surprising again, but it's really an urgent need because this is going to be a basis for even the work to be done with negotiations at COP26. So finally, in terms of recommendations, I strongly think that, we all know that in the Paris Agreement in Article 8, loss and damage is not presented. It shows that it should not be a liability to anyone. And I think it's lightly taken, like I said before. And I think what this requires is much more of advocacy that builds on a strong adaptation work and advancement that have been done, so that there is much more separation of funding and support around adaptation to have some target that focuses on loss and damage. So this will require supporting for integration of loss and damage into country adaptation policies and plans and laws, because I am almost sure that very many countries, especially in East Africa, don't have even laws guiding this. So I think it would not be a very strong argument for any country to advance negotiations where they don't have themselves legal and policy frameworks that clearly guide this. This is going to be very difficult. How do you integrate it into the NDC, for example? How do you integrate into the national adaptation plans? So, and then this will also require support, because it could be partly because of capacity issues. So this will also require support to be able to conduct assessments so that the policies, the plans, the practices that are being advanced, they're well informed by evidence. Otherwise, it will be another kind of rushed project-based work to do documents that will not guide the loss and damage work that's glaringly needing work yesterday. And then finally, but again, more or less hinging on what I've said before, capacity building. And this includes also aspects to do with institutional, technical, and all other aspects of capacity building. But again, very critical is also we need financing, because there's always an issue of finances, and I hope this is something that can be advanced in COP26. But again, we need to put our houses in order as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David, for a quick presentation. We are running against time. It's almost 5:30. So for the sake of continuing our discussion along the same thing, I will now invite first Dr. Matthew Savage for making a quick 5 minutes presentation on Amphan, which battered the southern coast of Bangladesh and India in May 2020. So a quick presentation by Dr. Matthew. Please have your presentation. Yeah.
Great. I hope everybody can see and hear this. So I'll keep this very, very quick. I'm presenting some work which is being undertaken through the what's called the Urban Climate Change Resilience Trust Fund, which is a trust fund which is managed through the Asian Development Bank. It's a $150 million trust fund, really aimed at supporting the mainstreaming of resilience into secondary cities and rapidly growing cities across South and Southeast Asia. The trust fund is supporting 8 countries and overall has supported more than 70 cities, but it's focusing its efforts on 25 of these. The fund is supported by the UK government as well as Swiss cooperation. So the case study really focuses on Bangladesh, in particular on 2 secondary cities, which are Baghahat and Patuakhali. Collectively, these cities have a population of 3 million people, so they're quite substantial, but highly vulnerable to regular cyclone and flood impacts. And if we look at the impacts of the super cyclones, these can be quite substantial. So for example, Cyclone Sidat in 2007 left more than 3,500 people dead across Bangladesh. And within these 2 cities, there were more than 200,000 people impacted with huge infrastructure damage, flooding, more than 156 kilometers of roads, for example, damaged. These districts and municipal areas are really highly vulnerable to a range of impacts. So both coastal flooding, but river flooding as well, a cyclone, and then extreme heat events. So a little bit of the work that's been going on. So the Urban Climate Change Trust Fund runs alongside the main Asian Development Bank investment program across these 8 different countries on urban infrastructure. One of these projects in Bangladesh, the ADB Coastal Towns Environment Infrastructure Project, was launched in 2014. And that brought $94 million worth of capital investment in resilient infrastructure and technical assistance grants as well for 8 cities in Bangladesh in particular. Where the trust fund has been active is really in supporting the climate change vulnerability assessments and the 5-year plans that were developed in select cities, in 7 cities in Bangladesh, and building capacity and governance for climate change management in the secondary cities. There was also an additional £6 million grant, which was used to directly fund emergency access roads, cyclone shelters, and drainage in Bagahat and Patuakhali in particular. And you can see on the right-hand side of the screen the vulnerability mapping that was done in these urban contexts to identify the areas where infrastructure would go based on the vulnerability to different aspects of climate. Fortunately for the project, but unfortunately for the people of these 2 cities in Bangladesh, we've had the opportunity to test the effectiveness of these infrastructure investments and governance investments due to the impact of Super Cyclone Amphan in May 2020. Bagahat and Patuakhali were the 3rd and 5th most impacted of the municipal areas within Bangladesh. And costs in Bagahat, for example, were estimated by the municipality in the region of $50 million from that one event alone. What we can say about the impacts was that the 2 municipalities had significantly higher preparedness, both in terms of the national early warning systems, but also in terms of their local evacuation plans. And as a result, there were only 2 deaths within the 2 divisions. And the city areas themselves escaped with really quite low levels of infrastructure damage. And of the infrastructure which the ADB and the Urban Trust Fund had supported, there was no damage to the roads, the water drainage systems, or the community shelters. So that gave some indication that the planning work had been robust. But also these benefits flowed through into the local populations in terms of their ability to react themselves, in terms of seeking shelter and being able to move around the city during these events. So just to finalize, finish with a couple of lessons. So at the country level, I think what this has demonstrated is that it is possible to mitigate some of the worst impacts of and loss and damage of these climate events through better planning and coordinated investment. There are ways of doing this, and we see in real world situations now how these benefits can flow through. And there is potential there to scale up this approach, this integrated approach across other secondary cities in Bangladesh. Just some higher level thoughts on lessons for COP. What we're doing is, in our economic analysis, we're seeing significantly higher economic impacts in urban environments, and that's partly because of the density of population that you get in urban environments, the concentration of very vulnerable populations, but also the presence of high value infrastructure in the urban centres. So there are very, very high costs in the urban environment, and perhaps higher costs than you might find within the wider agricultural systems or rural systems. We're seeing that benefits of these investments in capacity and infrastructure are significantly higher than the costs of doing so, with benefit cost ratios of at least 2 to 1, but potentially higher. And also these investments have significant co-benefits in terms of growth, health, education. The shelters double up as schools, for example. The transport infrastructure provides trading opportunities. So there are strong sort of economic value benefits for investment in urban resilience. However, there is a need for scaling of international support for urban resilience investment and planning. It is generally a sort of poor cousin of rural resilience activity and rural loss and damage, which may have come out of sort of community-based analysis or agricultural systems. So the urban focus on loss and damage needs more investment and more study. I'll leave it at that in the interest of time. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Matthew, thank you for your quick presentation. Now let us come to a new topic from directly from the loss and damage. We thought that the GCF's accountability and redress mechanism, which GCF has instituted, is an interesting area to do an analysis on. So we have requested Ms. Shara Bantahura, who is a lawyer and a lecturer at the North-South University, a private university in Bangladesh. So please, Shara, make your quick presentation and share with us your thoughts.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. So this policy brief is a little bit different than the others all the presenter presented. It's not a case study, but it tend to assess the accountability and redress mechanism of GCF against environment, social, and gender-related safeguard. As a financial mechanism of UNFCCC, GCF aims to contribute significantly to achieving the mitigation and adaptation goal of global community. It has a mandate to promote low emission and climate resilient development in developing country. Developing country parties can access funds from GCF through 3 financing windows, namely adaptation, mitigation, and private sector. Next slide, please. In disseminating farm, GCF work by adopting partnership approach with developing country partners and its accredited entities. GCF accredited entities includes Multilateral Development Bank, Development Finance Institute, government ministries, and non-profit sector. Next slide, please. As a financial investment can cause negative impact towards local community and environment, it can lead displacement of local people, native habitat, and may give rise social inequalities. To prevent this, GCF has mandated to not to do harm and do good. Based on this, they have some guidelines: right-based approach, equity, equal participation, respecting rights of all, precautionary approach, accountability, free, prior, and informed consent are the key guidelines of GCF while they are adopting or implementing a project. Next slide, please. Recently, especially in the December 2018, GCF adopted a specific policy that detail out all the safeguard mechanism that project funded by GCF needs to adopt while they are implementing that project. And in this safeguard mechanism, they have some clear mandate that they need to comply with, which comes like avoiding, and where avoidance is not possible, mitigating adverse impact on people and the environment. Similarly, enhancing equitable access to development benefit and giving due consideration to the vulnerable groups, individual, local communities, indigenous people, and also to the marginalized people. Next slide, please. To enhance gender equality and to minimize gender and climate change related risk, recently in 2019, December, they adopt another policy which is called Updated Gender Policy and Gender Action Plan 2020 to 2030. So this plan is going to be adopted from last year actually, but in practice it's yet to be adopted, applied by the ongoing project. So in this policy, they took safeguards so that enhanced gender equality within the governing structure can be adopted, and also it has the goal of gender equality and women empowerment through its decision on the allocation of fund, operation, and overall impact as outlined in the Gender Action Plan. Next slide, please. While GCF adopt this safeguard mechanism in their different project, they do have some sort of tools that they use, or we can say it as a yardstick that they use before giving the fund and once the fund is allocated. And those yardsticks are what are the financial or fiduciary standards of that country and the implementing partner, what are the risk management process, what are the environment and social standard, what are the monitoring and evaluation criteria of NAD, what are the gender policy and legal standard. These are the things that they actually go through before they allocate the fund. And once the fund is dispersed, GCF continuously evaluate, monitor the environmental, social and gender related standard performance of the accredited entities and its supported activities. Next slide, please. And in their evaluation checklist, GCF specifically see what are the how the project are managed efficiently, what are the impact quality assessment, what are the integrity, how the risks are managed, and how the gender issues are integrated, what are the enhancement of performance, what achievement are they are doing, and what are the credibility, especially overall performance of the studies. However, as I said, like both these policies are adopted very recently, and after 2020 project that are receiving fund from GCF, they need to implement this safeguard in their ongoing process. So we couldn't see any project that already implemented this safeguard. Yes, considering that these are the very recent adoption of within the framework of GCF policy. However, so far the standard or the safeguard they have implemented and the way they establish or develop their monitoring and evaluation process, there are still some gaps because the standards are not very clear, and what should be the maximum level of tolerance or flexibility of the accredited entities. This higher level of scalings are yet to be decided, and there is no indicator related to risk rating. That part is also missing. Dearth of clear guidance on how participatory monitoring and evaluation will be applied. There is also lack of monitoring and evaluation tool from enforcing gender policy. There is also lack of inclusiveness from the gender perspective. There is no guidance on how to evaluate shifting of risk. There is also lack of transparency measurement tools for assessing environmental, social, and gender related risk. There is no reference of environmental, social, and gender safeguards related audit, which is very, very important. Also, online-based knowledge and information dissemination is also missing so far the standard that adopted. So in COP26, especially when the overall structure of the GCF outcome will again will evaluate, I think these are the things we need to actually address. If GCF really wants to strengthen their safeguard mechanism, especially for the environment and gender perspective, their monitoring and evaluation aspect really need to strengthen a lot. I mean, there are the mechanism is I have to say, like, it's very premature in the stage, and it needs to be developed in a more further spectrum. And in COP26, I mean, this saw the discussion of how to strengthen the monitoring and evaluation process of GCF need to actually highlight it a lot. So that's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Shara, for sharing your thoughts on a very important topic, which will become more important in the coming days. So, ladies and gentlemen, you got to hear 7 case studies, 6 commissioned by us and 1 by Dr. Matt. And we can see lots of similarities in the country dynamics, in the direction, in the ways forward in country, as well as our asks for the at COP26. So I looked at the question answer box, not any question, but if among the participants, if you raise your hand and make short comments, we will welcome. But let us see. I don't find any question or comment in the chat box too. So should I invite Dr. Saleem? We don't have much time also. Dr. Saleem,
sure,
to summarize and give us a direction combining all the thoughts
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Mizan. Thank you to all the presenters and to Honorable Chair. Can I ask everybody to turn on their camera for a minute or so we can take a picture of everybody? We get a screenshot. So I'm not going to summarize at all. It's been very, very rich. What I'm going to do is to share 3 thoughts about where do we go from here. And I'll start at the country level with the 6 country studies that we had. These are very, very important building blocks of taking the issue of loss and damage further. We need to have very good systematic country level data, information, capacity building, as has been pointed out by all the speakers so far. So this particular study is really a scoping study that should lay the foundation for continuing to do this. And we are quite hopeful that the funders who funded this initial study will be pleased with the result and hopefully will give us funding to continue to do them. Now, what is important about getting this good, solid evidence at the national level is really what we do with it at the global level. And the context for COP26 has already been mentioned by a number of the speakers. What I will do is I'll share with you a little development. In fact, yesterday evening, as part of this Gobeshona conference series, we've had a series of keynote speakers from eminent international experts. And yesterday nighttime, my time, morning in Washington, we had a speech by Jennifer Morgan, who is the head of Greenpeace in the USA. She is an extremely active advocate on climate change issues from civil society. She's been to almost all the COPs, and she's a very regular person on the Climate Action Network advocacy side from civil society. And she's also very well connected to the US establishment, particularly the incoming administration of President Biden. And so she talked about very interesting developments on loss and damage in the courts, the global courts, court systems taking cases against polluters. And there's a whole variety of them, which I won't go into. I would recommend watching her talk if you are able to. We'll be uploading it very soon. It will be available. But the court system is now taking cases around the world. These are in national courts. These are not international courts. So in the US, in Germany, and in various other places, the courts are taking cases against polluters. And there are 2 aspects of the case that has to be made, as she explains in her talk. The first aspect is attributing climatic effects to human-induced climate change. So if there's a hurricane or a flood or a drought, we have to prove that it is more severe because the global temperature has already gone up beyond 1 degree, and it's not just a natural event anymore. This is now happening. The climate change science community is very, very good now at attributing. This year, 2020, the last year, 2020, number of events, the scientists have done this attribution. The attribution does not say this event happened because of climate change. It says the event was more severe by 20%, 50%, 70% because of human-induced climate change. Okay, so the event is natural, but the intensity of the event is significantly enhanced by human-induced climate change because temperature has already gone up by 1 degree. And the cyclone Amphan is a very good example. Amphan became a category 6 while it was in the Bay of Bengal because the sea surface temperature was elevated well above normal sea surface temperature. So it became a much more severe cyclone. Climate change did not cause it, but climate change made it much more severe. And that's credible. Scientists will testify to that. So we have that part of the attribution question. Can we attribute impacts to human-induced climate change? In the past, we could not do that, so it was very difficult. We asserted it, but there was no proof. The other side of the equation, which is where we come in, is when we have damage occurring, we have to assess that damage, quantify that damage, and also make a link to if this cyclone, let us say Amphan, had been a category 3 instead of a category 5, the damage would have been less. And so we can now attribute the extra damage to the human-induced climate change factor in the cyclone. And that is another piece of the puzzle that is needed for us to claim, if we want to claim for compensation or we want to claim for liability. And that is now happening. And our on-the-ground measurements and studies will give us the confidence to be able to cite these data and information in the global negotiations. So where do we go from here? We had a very interesting conversation on two tracks. The first track is on COP26, and in particular on the incoming Biden administration, which has already taken a very positive step. Biden has already written to the UNFCCC. They're going to come back to Paris Agreement. They're rejoining the Paris Agreement. He's appointed some very, very notable climate change relevant officials, both at the domestic level as well as the international level, with John Kerry as the former Secretary of State, who actually negotiated the Paris Agreement at the global level. And John Kerry is very knowledgeable about this, so he doesn't have to learn. He knows what to do, and he can start moving immediately. So the issue that we talked about is how can we get John Kerry, who incidentally, to recall, 5 years ago in Paris, was the person who insisted on inserting the language. Those of you who follow the negotiations on loss and damage will know this. In Article 8, the only way we got Article 8 on loss and damage was because we had to accept language in COP21 decision from John Kerry. This was his language, that this would not affect compensation or liability. You know, it's very unusual for a treaty to have something saying, what is this treaty not about? Treaties talk about what they're about, not about what they're not about. But they put that in, and John Kerry insisted on putting it in. So the argument we need to make with them now, 5 years ago, you got away with it. Now you cannot get away with it. COP26, that will not hold. You are going to have to face an issue of loss and damage. You're going to have to come up with a solution. We have given a number of ideas from our side, but you have to talk to us and you have to do this. So the good news is that there is willingness, interest. In fact, just between ourselves, I understand that John Kerry has scheduled a call with our Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina in her capacity as the chair of the Climate Vulnerable Forum. And in fact, the Climate Vulnerable Forum under Bangladesh's chairmanship has adopted loss and damage as an issue for COP26. It was not a major issue before. It is going to be now. And so now, with the combination of the LDC chair amongst the negotiators, together with the other three groups with whom we have been very closely cooperating, AOSIS, ILAC, and the Africa group, we should move forward, have a good plan of action, work in harmony with the Climate Vulnerable Forum under Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's leadership, as Dr. Kadir has made it recommendation in it. We have a common agenda. We need to join forces and be very strategic, both with the United States incoming administration, but also with the COP26 presidency, Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his presidency, and let them know that a suitable, agreeable outcome on loss and damage on COP26 is a sine qua non for us. If we do not get it, we will say COP26 was a failure. And we have to make that threat, and we have to stick to that. And we have to be united in sticking to that. And so a lot of work to be done. We need to be joining forces, combining forces, working together with civil society and many other actors, and taking this forward as we go forward. And we're very happy that the Least Developed Country Universities Consortium is able to play a part in the knowledge gathering and the contribution of evidence and information and research for this major global struggle that we are all part of. I'll stop there. Thank you very much, Professor Mizan.
Wise words. Allow me, let me have the indulgence of inviting Madam Tenzing Wangmo, who was the lead negotiator till a few months back. So, Madam Tenzing, you are here with us. Please share your thoughts in 2-3 minutes. Hello.
Hello,
Yes.
Dr. Mizan.
Please come in.
Yeah,
we had a
I'm
very
here.
able negotiator in you, so we'd love to hear from you.
Okay, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to say a few words at the closing of this workshop. Very interesting. I found it very interesting. I really don't have much to add, but really want to support what Dr. Saleemul had said. And also very happy to note that our universities are now coming forward with the ground realities. I think research is very important to back up the negotiation, and I think we are on the right path. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, madam. So we had a long discussion, about 2 hours today. And as I mentioned, we have many similarities. So we have unity and diversity in the agenda of loss and damage. Our asks, both internally and externally, directed at COP, are the same. So let us unite and collectively let us fight for this. And I may share also, as I mentioned at the beginning, that we had a no-cost extension of our project up to the end of 2021, which was supposed to be ended in December 20. So as the Phento prefers to build capacity of young lady faculty members, so we have still the offer of funding some lady colleagues who had been involved in this study for your participation at COP26, where we plan to organize a side event with all these case studies and involving also the other international partners. So our lady faculty members, please keep tab on the developments for the upcoming COP26. Get yourself better ready so that you can present well the LDC countries. So with all this, let us call it a day. Thank you, Honorable Chair, for your wise words, and look forward to working with you. LDC Chair, which is represented by Bhutan now, and Bhutan has been doing an excellent job as the chair of the LDC group with all your commitments. So thank you, Chair and distinguished panelists and all the participants. Look forward to working.
David has raised his hand.
Bye-bye.
Probably he'd like to say something.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.